Karen strutted through her pristine neighborhood like a queen surveying her kingdom. As the self-appointed enforcer of the Homeowners Association, she believed the entire community was hers to control. Rules weren't just guidelines to her, they were sacred laws, and she delighted in punishing anyone who dared step out of line. Lawn gnomes? Ban. Holiday decorations that stayed up a day too long? Fine. Trash bins left out an hour past pickup? Citation issued. Karen had built a reputation for micromanaging every detail of her neighbors' lives, but nothing infuriated her more than parking violations. Every morning, she scanned the streets like a hawk, jotting down notes on which cars didn't belong, which ones looked too old for her perfect community, and which ones dared park an inch over the designated space. She saw herself as a defender of order, a guardian of neighborhood aesthetics. The HOA's parking regulations gave her an excuse to flex her power, and she used it with enthusiasm. Residents lived in fear of Karen's wrath. They knew one wrong move, a car parked slightly askew or a visitor staying overnight without permission, could lead to a fine or, worse, a towed vehicle. The HOA board had received dozens of complaints, but Karen always managed to dodge accountability. She claimed she was just keeping the neighborhood safe and beautiful. But Karen's sense of control was about to become her downfall. In her latest power trip, she had an idea. Why wait for violations to pile up when she could take action immediately? If she wanted a perfectly regulated street, she would make it happen. And so, with a smug smile and a gleam in her eye, she picked up the phone and made a call that would change everything. It was early morning when the rumble of a tow truck shattered the peaceful silence of the neighborhood. One by one, cars were being hooked up and hauled away, all on Karen's orders. She stood on the sidewalk with her arms crossed, nodding in approval as the operator did his job. "That one next," she barked, pointing at a silver sedan parked along the curb. "And don't forget the red truck over there. Not on the approved list." The tow truck driver hesitated. "Are you sure about this? Some of these cars don't look like they're violating anything." Karen scoffed. "I'm the HOA president. I make the rules. Just do your job." Neighbors rushed out of their homes, stunned by the chaos unfolding before them. "Karen, you can't just tow people's cars without warning," one woman shouted. "This is ridiculous," another man yelled. "My son's car was parked in our driveway, and you had it towed?" Karen simply smirked. "Rules are rules," she said. Everyone agreed to the HOA guidelines when they moved in. But amid the growing outrage, Karen had made a grave mistake, one she hadn't realized yet. Among the vehicles she ordered towed was a sleek, black SUV parked in a driveway. A car she hadn't bothered to check. A car that belonged to someone far more powerful than she imagined. As the tow truck driver secured the last car, the crowd murmured, uneasy. Something felt off. And in just a few hours, Karen would find out exactly why. The neighborhood had finally quieted down after the morning's chaos. Most residents were still in disbelief, shaking their heads at the absurdity of what had happened. Cars were missing, tempers were flaring, and the HOA group chat was on fire with complaints about Karen's reckless decision. But for Karen herself? It was just another victory. She sat on her porch, sipping her overpriced herbal tea, admiring the newly emptied street. "Finally, some order," she muttered to herself, satisfied with her handiwork. Then, a sleek, black luxury sedan rolled into the neighborhood. It was the kind of car that demanded attention, not just for its expensive design, but for the presence of the man who stepped out of it. He was tall, well-groomed, and exuded an air of quiet authority. Dressed in a tailored navy suit, he walked with deliberate precision, his eyes scanning the street before locking onto one particular spot, his driveway. Or rather, the empty space where his car had been that morning. A hush fell over the neighbors as they recognized him instantly. This wasn't just some resident. This was Ethan Marshall, the head of internal affairs for the police department, a man known for investigating misconduct and holding people accountable. And right now, he looked anything but pleased. Karen watched him approach, her smug expression faltering slightly. "Can I help you?" she asked, trying to maintain her usual dominance. Ethan ignored the question. His gaze swept over the crowd, then back to the vacant driveway. His jaw tightened. Finally, he spoke, his voice calm but edged with steel. "Where is my vehicle?" The tension in the air thickened. Some neighbors took a step back, sensing the storm that was about to hit. Karen, however, remained oblivious to the danger she was in. She smirked, folding her arms. "Oh, that car? It was towed this morning," she said, feigning indifference. "It was violating HOA regulations. No exceptions." For the first time, Ethan looked directly at her, his piercing gaze making her stomach twist. "You had my car towed," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. Karen swallowed. The way he said it sent a shiver down her spine, but she refused to back down. "Rules apply to everyone," she huffed. "Even you." That was the moment Karen's world began to crumble. Ethan let out a slow breath, his patience visibly thinning. "Do you even know what you've done?" he asked. Karen scoffed. "I enforce the HOA guidelines. It's my job to ensure the neighborhood follows the rules." She squared her shoulders, trying to reassert dominance. "You didn't have a visible parking permit, so your car was towed. It's that simple." Ethan took a step closer, his expression unreadable. "You had an unmarked law enforcement vehicle towed without checking the registration, without notifying the owner, and without any legal grounds. Do you understand what that means?" Karen blinked. For the first time, doubt crept into her mind. Well, the HOA has authority over." "No, it doesn't." Ethan cut her off. His voice was controlled, but there was no mistaking the warning in his tone. "What you did could be considered theft. You illegally ordered the removal of my property without cause. And that's just the beginning." Karen's breath hitched. "Theft?" she echoed, her confidence finally cracking. Ethan nodded. "And let's talk about abuse of power. You used your position to tow multiple vehicles, targeting residents without justifiable cause. That could easily be seen as harassment, possibly even fraud." He crossed his arms, tilting his head slightly. "You do know that Internal Affairs investigates misconduct, right?" Karen's face drained of color. The realization hit her like a brick wall. She hadn't just towed a police officer's car. She had towed the car of a man who specialized in holding corrupt people accountable. Neighbors exchanged knowing glances, some stifling smiles. The once feared HOA queen was now trembling in front of the one person she never should have crossed. Karen stammered, searching for a way out. "It was a mistake. I was just following the guidelines." Ethan didn't budge. "Then you won't mind explaining your actions to the city attorney," he said flatly. "I'll be filing a report. And trust me, HOA power doesn't protect you from the law." Karen's knees nearly buckled. The authority she had wielded so ruthlessly for years was slipping from her grasp in real time. She opened her mouth to protest, but for the first time in her life, she had nothing to say. Karen stood frozen on the sidewalk, her breath shallow as the flashing lights of multiple police vehicles illuminated the street. The tension in the air was palpable. A team of officers stepped out, their expressions unreadable but their presence alone enough to make Karen's stomach churn. Ethan Marshall, the head of Internal Affairs, wasted no time. With a simple nod, he motioned toward Karen. "Check the tow records," he ordered, his tone sharp. "Let's see exactly how deep this goes." Karen clenched her fists, trying to maintain her composure, but the murmurs from the gathered neighbors were getting louder. "I heard my car wasn't even in violation," someone whispered. "She towed mine just because she didn't like the color," another added. The officers wasted no time diving into the HOA's record. Within minutes, they uncovered what many residents had suspected for years. Karen had been selectively enforcing rules, often bending them to her own liking. Several cars that had been towed weren't even violating any regulations. "You had these vehicles removed without valid cause," one officer said, shaking his head as he flipped through the paperwork. Some of these people weren't even breaking the rules. Karen's face was burning red now. I was just trying to keep the community in order," she stammered, her usual arrogance slipping away. One of the officers scoffed. "By making up your own rules?" Ethan crossed his arms. "You abused your power," he stated bluntly. "And I don't take that lightly." Then, the final blow came. The president of the HOA board, a graying man who had long tolerated Karen's overreach, stepped forward. "We've had enough of this," he said, shaking his head. "This isn't the first time you've gone too far, Karen, but it will be the last." A hush fell over the crowd as he pulled out a sheet of paper. "The board is holding an emergency vote," he announced. "Effective immediately, Karen is removed as HOA president." Gasps and scattered cheers erupted from the crowd. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "You can't do this," she shrieked. "I built this community. But no one was listening. The board members swiftly finalized the vote, stripping Karen of her position right then and there. Then came the final sting, a hefty fine for her unauthorized towing spree. Karen opened her mouth to protest again, but this time no one cared. The power she had clung to so tightly had been yanked away in a single night. And karma? Karma had arrived in uniform, with sirens and a full audience. Karen sat in stunned silence, her once proud posture now slumped in defeat. The very community she had lorded over for years was now openly celebrating her downfall. And her punishment? It wasn't just her removal from the HOA board, it was personal accountability. "You are personally responsible for reimbursing every resident for their towing fees," Ethan declared, folding his arms. "Including mine." Karen's face turned ghostly white. The financial damage was devastating. Towing fees weren't cheap, and with multiple vehicles involved, the total quickly climbed into the thousands. One by one, angry residents stepped forward with their receipt. "You owe me $300. I had to pay $450 to get my car back. My SUV, $500. Karen tried to argue, tried to beg for leniency, but there was none to be found. "Rules are rules," Ethan said, throwing her own words back at her with a smirk. With no way out, Karen had no choice but to start writing checks. Each stroke of the pen was like a dagger to her pride. The woman who had spent years enforcing unnecessary fines and punishments on others was now suffering the very fate she had forced upon them. But it didn't end there. Her reputation was completely shattered. No one in the neighborhood respected her anymore. Those who had once tolerated her now avoided her entirely. Others, emboldened by her downfall, made no effort to hide their delight. A group of neighbors set up a celebratory barbecue the very next day, inviting everyone except Karen. The message was clear: she was no longer welcome. Even the HOA board wasted no time implementing new leadership, one that valued fairness over Karen's ego-driven enforcement. Under the new rules, residents would be properly notified before any towing could happen. No more unfair fines. No more unnecessary power trip. Most importantly, no one in the neighborhood had to fear waking up to an empty driveway ever again. And Karen? She became nothing more than a cautionary tale. A former tyrant, left with nothing but humiliation and a dwindling bank account.